Hello my bookish friends out there in booktube land, and welcome to another episode of Tristan and the Classics. In this video I'm going to be answering some questions from the Jane Austen at home tag, which has been sent on to me by the lovely Christina from Knitting Books etc. I'll put a link below. You should go and have a look. She is a wonderful woman. I love the way she talks about books and her little anecdotes that go with it. Anyway, without further ado, let's get stuck into these tag questions, shall we? So I've got all the questions written here and I'll just read them off and answer them based on my classics library, not from any of the books that I have. So, number one, based on the book Mansfield Park, we get the quote, "The grandeur of the house astonished, but could not console her. Name a grand book that you may or may not have found difficult to read." Okay, so a grand book that I've read a few. There's one that obviously springs to mind, which I read this year, but I'm actually going to go and pick... Right, I'll show you. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. I mean, it is a grand book. I was thinking of using Anna Karenina, but this book is wonderful. I haven't read it this year, I've read it before, and I will be covering it because if you've watched my video 12 books I absolutely will read this year, then you'll know that this is one of them. And it's just such a great book. Did I find it easy or hard to read? Easy. If you've never read Alexander Dumas, he is probably, is he? In my opinion, the quickest read you'll ever get. He is so quick on action and intrigue, and he can make anything sound exciting. And that's why this book's good. Now, obviously, of something that thickness, we're talking coming up to 900 pages, 1,000 pages in some books, in some editions. Obviously, there is certain backstory that you need or filling in of detail. And in this book, you have a bit of a gap between Edmond Dantes getting arrested and his time in Chateau d'If, the fortress, the island fortress prison. His discovery of, well, I won't spoil it, but he's told about some treasure. And then he turns up years later to wreak vengeance on people who had him put in prison. Now, to fill that in, there's a section about 2/3 of the way through the book, maybe half the way through the book, that is really flat. And you just have to struggle through it. But as soon as you get past that, I don't know, is it 5 chapters worth? Once you've got through that, what a rip-roaring read. So no, it's not hard to read at all. If you're scared of large books, I recommend starting with this one because you will actually find it easy to get through, unless you're one of those people who keeps looking at the pages thinking, I just want the book over. Try not to do that, just enjoy the story, it's great. Second, based on Sense and Sensibility, Barton Cottage. In comparison of Norland, it was poor and small indeed. Name a book about a household in difficult circumstances. A household in difficult circumstances. What would you pick? By the way, I'm going to put all these questions below. I'd love it if you're watching this, would comment your own answers to these questions. Just make a list and then read others and see if you agree with them. Name a book about a household in difficult circumstances. Okay, so 2 spring to mind here. The first would be In Crime and Punishment. So you've got Raskolnikov in that, and you have his mother and his sister who are on hard times, and part of that inspires Raskolnikov to commit the terrible crime that he does. And you also have another family, Sophia's family. Of course, she's made a prostitute because of how poor they are, despite her mother coming from a well-to-do background. So that's quite affecting. But I wouldn't say the book is about the family per se. So, I know which one. How about this? The Tenant of Wildfowl Hall. So, this book is about family, although albeit a small family. It's just the husband and wife and their little boy, who doesn't really feature much in the story at all. You have in this book Helen Huntingdon. She's ran away from her home and her husband, who is abusive, primarily because he's a drunkard, but he's a rake as well, and she says to him, that, you know, you don't want me anymore, you would rather be where I am not, and he's just a philanderer. And she actually says that she hates him, she hates him, she hates him. But despite that, the endurance of what she puts up with at home with him, and the goodness of her nature, ooh, it's quite moving. And if you've listened to any little reviews that I've done before, which feature this book, you'll know that it's more than just about domestic abuse and strife, but there's definitely, this is about a family in hard times, and how Helen Huntingdon, the wife and the mother, does something about it, and how she makes her own way. It's really, really a good book. Some people say it's boring, and I totally get why they would say that. It's not an action book. It's not full of sinister intrigue or subplots or whodunits. It's straightforward. It's quite grueling because it's emotionally hard, but the way it's written really makes you feel the pressure and strain that Helen is under. So yes, this is the book I would say depicts a family having a hard time or in hard circumstances. The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. Okay, so now we step over to Hartfield. Quick quiz question. Hartfield is the house in which of Jane Austen's books? Emma. I believe few married women are half as much mistress of their husband's house as I am of Hartfield. And Emma herself says that. Now, name a book that you feel entirely the mistress or master of. I don't consider myself being the master of a book, because you're constantly finding yourself in books. Even ones you've already read. When you go back, you rediscover yourself at a later date with and experiences that you've gone through. You suddenly see shades of them within the book that sort of stand up in high relief, as it were. What am I the master? What book am I master of? That's really hard. For the book I've probably most studied and analysed, that would be the Bible. Again, a key cornerstone, probably the cornerstone for all of the Western canon, the Western literature, obviously not including Homer and everything that went before it, but it's had the most influence on the European works. I know. It's handy. How about this one? Now, it's one of the Everyman library books, but I don't have the paper dust jacket, just the cloth bound. And it is, if you can see this, I don't know if you can see that, Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. Yes, am I the... Right, I'll consider myself the master of this book in the sense that I've read it many times, and that from the first reading even to now, and I hopefully will do a free audiobook recording of this whole book. If you want that, please say below that you would like to hear me do a full audiobook on my YouTube channel for your benefit. It's hard, mine, because there's a lot of voices to do because Dickens does caricatures. But this book constantly touches me, and not just through Pip, but through lots of them. Miss Havisham, there is so much to learn from Miss Havisham. Joe Gargery, the blacksmith. Mrs. Joe. Pumblechook, although annoying, has a subtle role which, yeah, touches on you. Wemmick. I really like Wemmick. Jaggers. Now, I love Jaggers. Jaggers absolutely brilliant. So, yes, every character, I think, even Estelle, she gets me in this. So yes, I would say I'm very conversant in this book and very emotionally conversant in this book. I think I can relate a lot of my life, and when I see things I can think, ooh, like Great Expectations. So that's the book I would say that I am master of. Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. Question 4. Fullerton, Northanger Abbey. Now, there was nothing so charming to her imagination as the unpretending comfort of a well-connected parsonage, something like Fullerton. Name a book containing a contented family. Name a book containing a contented family. It's really hard to do this off the top of your head. Because, strangely enough, although most books happen with family relations and interactions, you don't always see the book as family. although Great Expectations, which I mentioned before, family is, family has a very definite place in that book. But the book's not about contented families at all. What would you say to that? A book about a contented family, or that contains a contented family. Ooh, actually, Bill, where have we got now? Let's have a look. We are here. Oliver Twist. So you don't think of a contented family with Oliver Twist, and I'm sure there's a better example, but I've just finished reading this again this month, so it'll be in my wrap-up, so I won't give too much away. But in here, Oliver meets with a group of individuals who help him. Now, obviously, he has a certain criminal gang family, but he's helped by the Maylies and Dr. Losburn and Grimwig, and I can't remember the other chap's name, Brownlow. Now, not all of those are related, but the Maylie family, yeah, they are good. They are a contented family. And the two servants that live with them are quite happy to be servants in this family. And Oliver becomes linked to it as well. And so, yeah, the ending's very interesting as well regarding family. So actually, if you've read Oliver Twist, do you know what I mean? Put a mention in the comments regarding this. Do you know what I mean when I say this contains a contented family, or is it at least even about a contented family to a degree? So, Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. Ooh, that's 2 Dickens in a row. Number 5, Rosings Park, the grand house of Lady Catherine de Bourgh in Pride and Prejudice. He declared he might almost have supposed himself in the small summer breakfast parlour at Rosings. Oh yes, I remember this. A comparison that did not at first convey much gratification. This is the parson, that keeps talking about Rosings Park. Name a book that other books are constantly being compared to. Wow. Name a book. Now, Christina, in her video, she did make a really good point. She said, not so much a book, but Jane Austen as a whole. I thought that was a great comment. How many books say this is the new Jane Austen? So that's what Christina said. But an actual book, well, people use the colloquial phrase, that's the Bible of, so I suppose. But it's not often like you're comparing a direct relation book to book. Who compare? No. Maybe. There it is. Over here. How about this one? Yes, definitely. Without a shadow of a doubt. 1984 by George Orwell. Practically every dystopian novel that comes out is compared to this book. You know, you read something, I think, I can't remember the author's name, but I don't know if you wrote it, I don't know if you've read it, Wool, I can't remember the author's name, and when it was sold to me, as it were, by a blurb, it said, you know, it's 1984 all over again. So, and as it happens, it's not. The only way it's 1984 is it's dystopian. So, no, it doesn't resemble 1984 at all. 1984 is constantly being used by any dystopian popular release, not by the author, but by those who are trying to promote it, because people relate to this. I mean, at the moment in the news, 1984 is talking about a lot, you know, in comments and people's worries about government. And lots are compared to it. However, I would say the difference between dystopian novels and this classic is that modern dystopian novels generally, and I haven't read all of them, so I'm going to be wrong somewhere, but generally they start in the author's head as a dystopian society that they've made up and then introduce a story within it. Orwell did not do that. Granted, he would have worked out some dystopian world, but it came not as a world and then put a story in it. It came from a premise that could lead to an authoritarian world, where the state can control the thought police and the Ministry of Truth. A lot of what he was basing, funnily enough, was focused on political correctness. That's where the Ministry of Truth came from. It's the words you use that make people think, well, it can't be a bad thing then. So that's how Big Brother gets away with a lot of things. And Big Brother looks after you, doesn't it? It's a positive connotation, except in this book it's turned around. So Orwell did know about political correctness. Of course, Stalin, the dictator of the USSR, was using it to form subservience to the Politburo in the Soviet Republic. So this is something that George Orwell picked up on, as well as many other things. So he's different to other dystopians in that he saw ideas and philosophies and ideologies. I might say here, I don't believe Orwell was actually fully against socialism. I think he sort of liked the idea, but he saw ideologies that tried to abuse that idea, and he built the world as a consequence of those ideologies into 1984. So, by far, amongst the strongest of dystopian novels, and the one that everyone seems to relate their book to. 1984 by George Orwell. HMS sloop, the Asp, Persuasion. Quite worn out and broken up, I was the last man who commanded her. Show us a book that is looking the worse for wear. So, from my library, a book that's looking pretty awful. I have quite a few old books. Okay, right. Some of them will be on a different shelf, so I'll see if this one's here. So, first here. Don't know if you can see this. This is my small, compact, complete works of Shakespeare. Lovely book, actually. But as you can see, it's sort of flopping and falling apart, and his pages got loose. Lovely gilt binding, gilt edging to the paper, though. Really like that book, but it's not my worst. There's my worst. Ha ha! Right, let's have a look here. Right. Show us a book that's worse for wear, you say? How about this? You can already see by its dingy brownness that it's not in good nick. Got splits on the spine. It's the King James version of the Bible. It's not a new King James, as you can see. It's pretty wrecked. They say the Bible is a book of 2 parts. This one literally is. I feel like Moses with the 10 Commandments. This is wrecked. I really should get this redone. The King James Bible, the original, is a masterpiece of literature. I think it's like 87% of it, maybe more, is actually Tyndale's translation. The translation he was burnt to the stake for. But Tyndale's idea when making this Bible translation was so that the common ploughboy could learn the Bible. Now, being as a lot of them couldn't read, in fact a great deal of them couldn't, when he translated this book, Tyndale wrote in a rhythm and a flow that allows you to memorize the scriptures. And that's what's so beautiful about it. When you read it, it's not just a translation of the ancient texts, but it is also a phenomenal piece of literature, whether you are religious, not religious, whatever. This is just beautiful lyricism on paper. It's magnificent. And of course, today, the most spoken English words in the entire world, apart from the word okay, are Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, Tyndale's own translation of the Lord's Prayer in Matthew 6. So yes, the reason this is so sort of wrecked, oh look, there's another page, Samuel there, fell out. The reason for it being so bad is this Bible is from the year, or was printed in the year 1804. So it's a bit older than me. Wow, to think about that, that is what? 217 years old. Do you ever have an old book and you wonder who else held this book? Who else's eyes looked upon these pages? What were they thinking? Yeah, that's wonderful. So that's a tatty book, that's a worn out book I've got. The King James Bible from 1804. Right. Back to the list. Northanger Abbey. An abbey? Yes, it was delightful to be really in an abbey, but she doubted as she looked round the room whether anything within her observation would have given her the consciousness. Okay. Name a book that wasn't as creepy or dramatic as you thought it would be. Yeah, have you ever had that? You're looking forward to a book which is raved about, which is very famous, or it's popular in its day, and then you read it and you're completely underwhelmed. Yeah, that happens quite a lot. You'll notice that if you're ever on Bookstagram or BookTube, a good example of that book would be Donna Tartt's Secret History. I mean, talk about dividing people. Loads of people are underwhelmed by it. But I'm going to pick from the classics and a book. Oh, yes. Do I dare say that one? Because Marion H., another YouTuber, by the way, if you haven't heard my other recommendations of YouTubers, Marion H. is definitely one you should go and look at. She is superb as a YouTuber. Link below. Well, you see, she loves Jules Verne, and one book that I really was underwhelmed with by Jules Verne was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. But it's not the worst. I'll tell you the one that was not as dramatic nor as scary as I thought it was going to be. And it's by an author I love and a fictional character I adore and recommend his works. And that is... Is it on this shelf? There you are, on the bottom. Sherlock Holmes. Oops, standing too close. Sherlock Holmes by Conan Doyle. Now, obviously not all of them. The Study in Scarlet, what a brilliant book. The Sign of the Four, amazing. But what's the most famous of Sherlock Holmes' stories? It's The Hound of the Baskervilles. And The Hound of the Baskervilles, I've got to be careful here not to let emotion rule the mind. Hound of the Baskervilles is not the worst of his stories. However, I feel it's the worst of his stories because it's built up so high, and then you read it and you think, puh, that was rubbish. And it's not rubbish. It just doesn't fit so well with Sherlock. The deduction that's necessary for Sherlock, the way the book works out, the story works out, and how the hound is discovered and what makes the hound so ferocious, just stretches the suspension of willing disbelief a little too far, I feel. And because of that, the magnificence of Sherlock's mind and deductive powers is watered down, in my opinion. And yeah, so that is actually the book that I would say did underwhelm me. It didn't scare me, it didn't excite me or thrill me as I thought it would do, being the most famous, The Hound of the Baskervilles by Arthur Conan Doyle. Portsmouth, Mansfield Park. The smallness of the house and thinness of the walls brought everything so close to her that, added to the fatigue of her journey and all her recent agitation, she hardly knew how to bear it. Now, Name a book that disappointed you when you revisited it. Okay. Now, funnily enough, I can answer this one straight away. There is a book have you read Three Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome? By the way, the K in Jerome K. Jerome is Klapka. What a great name. Three Men in a Boat is hysterical. I mean, it's just so funny. I read it probably every year. And every time I giggle. That man is a genius at writing funny anecdotes. But there's a sequel to Three Men in a Boat, and it's Three Men on the Bommel, which is where they leave England and they go over to Germany, the Black Forest area, where they go on a biking tour. And it's the same three guys, but when I first read it, I remember thinking, oh, I like that. And I would talk to people about Three Men in a Boat and Three Men on the Bommel and how wonderful they were. And then I reread the book, Three Men on the Bommel. And you know what? I struggled so hard with it. It just wasn't like Three Men in the Boat. That having been said, if you want to look something up from Three Men on the Bommel, try and find the chapter on when they try to break all the laws in Germany. That chapter had me shrieking with laughter. Absolutely killed me with laughter. I was crying my eyes out. And even now, if I read it, I still roar out loud because it's hilarious. But the book overall was definitely a book that disappointed me when I revisited it. And the reason I'm not holding it up is I lent both books out to a friend who insists that they never had them and that they have no recollection of even asking for them. Bounders. So that was that one. Jerome K. Jerome's Three Men on the Bommel. We're over at Kellynch Hall now, Persuasion. Principal seat, Kellynch Hall in the county of Somerset. Name a book from your ancestral home. So my ancestral home. So although I live in Wales now, I come from the Midland city of Coventry originally. So Coventry's by Birmingham, if you're looking on the map. Lovely place in the sense that outside of the grimy city is Stratford-upon-Avon, Shakespeare's birthplace. The Cotswolds are not far away. Warwick and its beautiful castle. Kenilworth and its beautiful castle. There's great English villages and towns around about. I'm trying to think of someone who comes from there or has written there. Of course, that took me far too long to get right. Where are we? Where are we? Where are we? Where are we? Middlemarch by George Eliot. I have been to the pub, which is where George Eliot lived or was born, one of the two, and because that is just on the outskirts of Coventry, near Nuneaton. So Nuneaton and Coventry, they're very close to one another. And Middlemarch, the actual grand sweep of Middlemarch, is based on the hamlet, or the small village I should say, of Foleshill. Now Foleshill is pretty much now in the thick of Coventry. It's not the centre, but it's buried within its suburban sprawl. And it's a very industrial area, to say the least. You can see all the houses there were made for factory workers and the like. But in George Eliot's day, it was not like that. It was a village on the way from Nuneaton to Coventry, and a quite prospering village too. And that is actually, from what I've been told, where Middlemarch is essentially borrowed from. That's because George Eliot, or Mary Ann Reed is her name, isn't it? Is it Mary Ann Reed? I'll have to check that up. She visited friends and I believe a relative who lived in Foleshill. And here's a bit of trivia for you. She got to know people there, and one of the families she particularly got on with was the family of a cobbler, so a shoemaker. And when she picked her nom de plume, instead of using her female name, she picked a male name in order to get published. She picked George Eliot. What I find very interesting is the cobbler himself in Foleshill, his name was George Eliot. So it's almost a tribute to a friend of hers whom he and his family she loved very much. So yes, that would be something from, what was it? A book from my ancestral home. One of the greatest books in the world, based upon an area which now in Coventry is not the best, to say the least. Just Google Street it and you'll see what I mean. Okay. Last of all, Pemberley. We all know which book Pemberley's from, Pride and Prejudice. They had now entered a beautiful walk by the side of the water, and every step was bringing forward a nobler fall of ground. Name a book that you are ready to dive into. So that sentence is where Lizzie and her aunt and uncle are coming into Pemberley's grounds, and she sees Pemberley and says, "Oh, to think of all of this, I could have been mistress." To quote Jennifer L. in the 1995 series of Pride and Prejudice, still the best rendition of the book, I might add. But name a book you're ready to dive into. That's the famous Colin Firth scene where he dives in the water and then swaggers soaking wet back to Pemberley. That made a myriad people swoon and faint. What's a book I'm ready to dive into? Oh, there's so many. So the book that I am ready to dive into, obviously to dive into something it can't be shallow, needs to be at least over 250 pages. Otherwise you'll bang your head on the rear cover. That one would be, a classic. Like, this one will be a real old classic. Where are we? I know I've got you here somewhere. There you are. Giovanni Boccaccio's Decemberon. Do you know anything about the Decemberon? This had a significant influence on many other authors, notably because it was written in the 14th century. So a lot of authors came afterwards. This work would affect Geoffrey Chaucer in writing the Canterbury Tales, because the Decemberon is like that in the sense that it's a group of tales being told and then combined together. Now, I don't know too much about it, but I do know that it marked a step forward. In this time period, of course, the Renaissance was beginning in Italy, and so works of art, works of literature, works of music, works of scientific exploration were all churning out of that beautiful zone of the earth. And the Decemberon by Boccaccio is one of them. So, let's see. It is 640 pages long in this version. The type, I don't know if you can see this. See if it will zoom in. That's the type setting. So it's quite small. It's not ridiculously small, but it's quite small considering it's 640 pages, which means in other works it's understandable why it's split into 2 volumes, or it runs to about 1100 pages in some editions. So yes, the Decemberon by Boccaccio. Have you read this? Tell me what you think before I even dive in, because I like knowing people's thoughts before I even go into a book, because it makes sure that I don't just have a very narrow focus, that I draw a conclusion on something from my first reading without considering an alternative opinion. So there you go. That was my Jane Austen at home tag review. So all of these books I have. So you're seeing the books I have at home. I'm going to write all of these questions down below. And so feel free, in fact I ask you to, go through them and write down your 10 books that would fit. Obviously you can't show us a dilapidated book, but you can still write which one it is, maybe the year it comes from. And I've got to pass this tag on to someone to recommend this on to 2 other booktubers. So I'm going to pass the tag, or I'm going to tag Christy from Dostoevsky in Space. What an amazing booktuber. Really lovely. So full of energy and pep and ginger and zip. Definitely go and check Christy's channel out. And also, I've tagged these ones before, and they are remarkable at their way of talking about books, the little conversations they have. And that is the Elegant Couples Book Review, I think it's called. Is that? Forgive me if I've got the title wrong. I will put the link below, because they pick some brilliant books that I've never heard of. A recent video was Musa Dag, about the Armenians' fight against the Turkish during the Turkish persecution of the Armenians way back, and that was just phenomenal to listen to them talk about that. I've ordered the book because of it. So go and check them out. But I'm tagging you both, okay? So if you want to do this video, feel free to do it. If you don't want to do it, of course, you don't have to. I won't be offended. So that was the Jane Austen at Home book tag. I hope you've enjoyed it, and until the next time, I wish you joy in your reading.